What's up, guys? I'm Cody Brockway, and you're back here, baby, for another episode of Brockway's Vinyl Bites. Woohoo! Yeah! It's always exciting here on Brockway's Vinyl Bites. We're always having a good time. We're always ready to rock. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about the solo albums from Prog Musos. All of these guys came from great, established, huge bands, and some of these guys decided to either make a one-and-done solo album or continue a solo career, either while they would stay in their band and do the solo thing on the side, or they would leave the band to fully embark on a solo career. But we're taking a glimpse into some of the solo albums of some of these well-known prog rock musos. So hey, let's get right into it, shall we? First up, yeah, we're gonna consider this one a solo album. Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. This is, of course, the complete Hot Rats sessions box. But yeah, this was quite the departure from anything he had really done with the Mothers of Invention in 1969. This is his first album billed just as Frank Zappa, and it's a strictly instrumental album, minus one track, of course. That's Willie the Pimp with Captain Beefheart on vocals. Everything else is totally instrumental, very melodic, very kind of jazzy in spots, but a really well done album. So this is what's considered the first solo album from Mr. Frank Zappa. Obviously, he would go back to Mothers of Invention, then do Apostrophe years later, which is another solo album. But even though it's got Mothers of Invention members on it too, you know, so... Tis what it is, my friends. But Hot Rats from 1969, Frank Zappa up in this. Woo! Next up, we have an album, the one and only solo album from this musician. This was a one and done while his main band was on hiatus for personal reasons within the band. Of course, we're talking about My Favorite Headache by Geddy Lee. Yeah, this sounds like a Rush album, but we're better off for it because this is an excellent album. Great solo album. It would be nice to see him do more, but you know, it's been 24 years since this came out and he hasn't done another solo album. But the good news is that Rush got back together just some short time after this and made a whole bunch of great records up until 2012. Of course, R.I.P. Neil Peart. But this album is phenomenal. If you haven't heard Geddy Lee's My Favorite Headache, I would recommend it. If you're a Rush fan and you already like, you know, the 90s and 2000s Rush albums, this is definitely right up your alley. Great record. Geddy Lee's My Favorite Headache. Now we're going to that old drummer from Yes and King Crimson. Yeah, he had a lot of awesome solo albums. We're going to talk about this one. One of a kind. I mean, listen to the guys he's got playing on this. He's got Alan Holdsworth, Dave Stewart, obviously, Bill Bruford as well, and Jeff Berlin. Fantastic jazz fusion, jazz rock, jazz fusion album. Very good. One of a kind, part 1 and 2. Hell's Bells, not the AC/DC song. 5G, The Sahara of Snow, Part 1 and 2. This album is very, very good. If you haven't heard it, I would recommend it. It helped launch a great solo career for Mr. Bill Bruford. Yeah, awesome. Bill Bruford, One of a Kind, just titled Bruford, One of a Kind. Next up is this very first solo album from this very successful and wonderful, amazing musician that you all know and you all love. You love his band that he's from. Yeah, he's from Pink Floyd. This is 1978's David Gilmour, his first solo album. Yeah, so when Roger Waters was sort of creating his brainchild, The Wall, David Gilmour wasn't super happy with the way things were going with the writing and creative process of that, so he went and made this wonderful album. And actually, one of the songs that he had demoed originally to be on this album, he never used, and it ended up being the entire musical track for Comfortably Numb. So there's that. But yeah, so this was a very creative time for him. Spawned a lot of great ideas and a great album, great solo album to start off his awesome solo career. I heard he's got a new solo album coming out. There's no more further information on that just yet, but when it comes, we'll tell you about it here on Brockway's Vinyl Bites. Next up, we have an album from 1973. This guy was already an established musician. He had played with David Bowie, and he was already a member of Yes at this point. He would be on and off with that band. Yeah, we're talking about Rick Wakeman. This is a great album, probably my favorite solo album of his. But he was definitely a full-time member of Yes when he did this album. I guess 1973, he was just about to leave Yes for the first time, because this was the same year that they would be doing Tales from Topographic Oceans. So, but yeah, great album, all instrumental. But you got lots of great musicians on here. You got You've got Alan White, Bill Bruford, Chris Squire, Steve Howe, kind of like a Yes album in spots. Then you've got other notable guys like David Winter, Mike Egan, Dave Lambert, Ray Cooper, you know him from Elton John's band, to make this absolutely classic album from 1973. This is The Six Wives of Henry VIII from Rick Wakeman. To keep it in the Yes family here, we're going to 1976, the very first solo album of John Anderson from Yes. Elias of Sun Hillow. This album is quite the ride. There's lots of, it's very tribal in a lot of spots. That's what I find about this album. But an interesting listen. There's John Anderson dressed up kind of like as a god there. This album, he locked himself away in his garage for about 2 weeks and created this whole thing and literally almost drove himself into the nut house. So he never took that approach again to writing another album. But it's a great album. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. John Anderson from Yes, Elias of Sun Hillow. Crazy album. Crazy, crazy, crazy. For the next one here, we're going back to 1975. Spoiler alert, this is my favorite solo album by any Yes member ever. It's got Bill Bruford on it. It's got Patrick Moraz on it too, which also another spoiler alert. I'm sorry to mention to you that I did not include any of Patrick Moraz's solo albums, but I love him. The Story of I album is absolutely excellent. So is his stuff in the band Refugee. If you haven't heard the Refugee album that he did, go check that out. But we're talking about, you already know what it is. It's Chris Squire's Fish Out of Water. This album is just astounding, top to bottom, really. And this is that super deluxe grandiose edition that came out a couple years ago. It's got the surround sound mix. It's got the new stereo remix, and it's got the vinyl LP in it too. Bunch of CDs, some bonus tracks. It's got Run with the Fox. But this album, top to bottom, is really, really decent. Hold Out Your Hand, You by My Side, Silently Falling, Lucky 7, and Safe, Canon Song. Only 5 tracks. Yeah, you know that the tracks are a bit longer, like Safe is about 14-15 minutes long, but it's worth the listen. It does not get tiring anywhere at all. This album is just astounding. Chris Squire, my favorite bassist ever, R.I.P. brother. One of the best to ever do it. And this was a one and done. He never made another solo album. He did do an album with Steve Hackett in 2012 called Squack It, A Life Within a Day. And he did a couple of albums with Billy Sherwood, which was the conspiracy thing that they did together. But he never did an album just billed as Chris Squire, like a proper studio album like this. He did do a Christmas thing, Chris Squire's Swiss. I can't speak. Chris Squire's Swiss Choir. Say that 5 times fast. Anyway. Moving out of the Yes camp and into the Genesis family, we are talking about a guitarist here who made this album that we're going to talk about today in 1975 and would leave Genesis in 1977 and would continue on his amazing solo career for the next 45 years or however long it has been. He's actually got a new album coming out on February 16th. That album is called The Circus and the Night Whale. The singles from it have been amazing. If you follow me over on ProgRadio.com and DeepNuggets.com and have heard my radio shows, then you've definitely heard me talk about and play the new singles from this album. But if you haven't figured out yet who we're talking about, of course we're talking about the one and only guitarist extravaganza, man. Steve Hackett. Oh, just great. Voyage of the Acolyte. So this album came out, like I said, in 1975. He was unsure of the future of Genesis at the time, as founding singer Peter Gabriel would leave the band for family reasons, and he would go and embark on his own solo career as well. We'll talk about that in a bit. So while he was kind of uncertain of Genesis' future, he's like, well, let's test the waters of making a solo album. Obviously, he ended up really liking it because he would leave Genesis 2 years later, and he's still doing the solo thing to this day, and very well. But Steve Hackett, this is his first album, often referred to as the Lost Genesis album. This is Voyage of the Acolyte. And it's referred to as the Lost Genesis album because it's got Phil Collins handling drum duties and vocal duties on some tracks. And, he's playing drums on the whole thing. Mike Rutherford handling some 12-string and, of course, all bass duties. Then he's got other guys like his brother. He's got John Hackett, who does synthesizers and flutes and stuff. He's got Sally Oldfield providing vocals. That'll be on the track The Shadow of the Hierophant, which when you go see him live, if you're in the UK, he's got Amanda Lehman doing that. This album is really, really brilliant, top to bottom. I like every track. It's quite the listen. It's very enjoyable, top to bottom. Starts off with Ace of Wands. It just blasts you right into it. There's no messing around with that thing, man. It's just as soon as you put the needle on the record, it's like Phil Collins, insane drum parts and great guitar things from Steve Hackett. Of course, awesome bass lines from Mike Rutherford too. And there's no Tony Banks on this, otherwise it would have probably been considered a Genesis album. But anyway, Steve Hackett, Voyage of the Acolyte. Much love to that Steve Hackett record. It's absolutely amazing. And we're going to continue with the love of the Genesis catalog, the Genesis family. You know, we're going to talk about Peter Gabriel's first album. This was him finding his feet as a solo artist. It is a very experimental album, like all of his solo albums are. And of course, this would birth the songs Moribund the Burgermeister, which is one of his weirdest songs in the coolest way. Salisbury Hill, which is still a mega hit to this very day. Still gets constant radio play every day across the world. And Here Comes the Flood, which would be the epic album closer. Great album. And great first record from Peter Gabriel. What a way to go solo, man. Awesome. Next up, we're staying here in the Genesis family for a little while longer. Of course, you know we have to talk about Mike Rutherford's Small Creeps Day. This was his first solo venture ever outside of Genesis. Of course, he would remain a full-time member of Genesis for the rest of time, from the beginning right to the end. But he definitely had some great solo moments, and this is absolutely one of them. This is the very first one. Of course, side one is the entire Small Creeps Day track, all 20, 25 minutes, however long it is. Then side two is individual songs. So you got Moonshine, Time and Time Again, Romani, Every Road, Overnight Job. Yeah, this album is very decent. It's very consistent all the way through. Quite an enjoyable listen, really. And of course, you got some great musicians backing him on this as well. Obviously, you have Mike Rutherford, one of the best bassists ever. Great songwriter, great everything. You got Anthony Phillips, and you got Simon Phillips. Wow, there's no relation between the two of them, but you got Anthony Phillips and you got Simon Phillips on here. Simon Phillips, of course, handling all the drum duties. He's a great drummer, and this is a great all-star band Mike's got with him here. The next album that he did after this is not my favorite one, but then he would go and do the Mike and the Mechanics stuff way later in the 80s, and that's all great stuff too. But yeah, 1980s Small Creeps Day from Mike Rutherford. If you haven't heard this, definitely go check it out. Next up, this is going to be the last Genesis family member that we talk about here today on Brockway's Vinyl Bites. He's the most iconic singing drummer of all time. You know, he was the full-time drummer for Genesis, and then he would become the full-time drummer and full-time singer for Genesis after Peter Gabriel would leave the band in 1975. In the 1980s, he would embark on a massively successful solo career, selling upwards of 150 million albums worldwide, in addition to Genesis's 100 million albums worldwide as well. So that means that this man has sold over 250 million albums worldwide. He is one of the most influential, inspirational musicians of all time, an amazing singer, astounding drummer. Obviously, we're talking about Phil Collins. Now, before we get into this album, I want to give a little nod to the Brand X stuff that he was part of in the mid to late 70s, the jazz fusion outfit. Those guys were so great. Hats off to Brand X, and Phil's drumming in that is just absolutely astounding, like it is in all the projects he plays drums in. That whole band is fantastic, and his first solo album is nothing short of awesome too. It's quite the departure from what Genesis was doing at the time. Of course, in the late 70s, Genesis were down to a trio. So Tony Banks was working on A Curious Feeling, which is also a great album. Honorable shout out to that one. Great album, A Curious Feeling. And Mike was putting together the Small Creeps Day stuff. So in 1979, between Duke in 1980, and then there were three in 1978, Phil actually would have some personal issues going on throughout his life at that point. His first wife would leave him very heartbroken, and so you can feel a lot of that emotional turmoil on this album. But there's a lot of it that's actually quite upbeat, and it's a very great album, top to bottom. I'd venture to say that it's a perfect album. Obviously, you start off the album with In the Air Tonight, then you go into the very calm and chill, sort of jazzy This Must Be Love, then the Motown version of the Genesis song, Behind the Lines. You got The Roof is Leaking, Hand in Hand, I Missed Again, which was another obviously huge hit single, Thunder and Lightning, If Leaving Me Is Easy, Tomorrow Never Knows, great Beatles cover. So most of this was written in the downtime between the Genesis stuff in 1979 and 1980. And of course, it would be officially released to the world in 1981. And it would jumpstart a massively successful solo career for Phil Collins. He's arguably the most well-known member of Genesis, despite all the albums sold. But we love Phil Collins around here, so Phil Collins face value. What's up? Next up, I've got 3 albums here that I want to talk to you about, all under the same umbrella, as these guys are from the same band. But 2 of these albums don't really sound anything like that band, while one of them is, obviously it's like, okay, this is definitely a solo album, it's a different approach, but it does sound a little like this band. Of course, we're talking about Dream Theater. First up, we're going to talk about John Petrucci's newest solo album, which I guess this would kind of be one of the open doors to getting Mike Portnoy back into the Dream Theater band, as Mike Portnoy contributes drum duties on this album, and it is absolutely amazing. It is all instrumental, but musically it is very akin to what Dream Theater might do. It's not super Dream Theater-y, but it is quite heavy. Awesome album anyway. That's John Petrucci's Terminal Velocity. Great record all the way through. Very guitar and drum heavy. The way I like it, man. Yeah. Next up in the Dream Theater camp is my Canadian amigo, of course, lead vocalist James LaBrie. This album is quite the departure from the Dream Theater sound, and it is even a departure from his previous solo outings. Actually, some of those were even borderline progressive death metal. This one is very acoustic-y, top to bottom. It's very much an acoustic album. But that will not discredit this album whatsoever. In fact, this is a very enjoyable listen all the way through. It is nice to hear his different approach and what he's got going on in his own world here. Just a really nice album top to bottom. You've got the song Devil and Drag, which is a really great tune. You do have the electric version of that. Both versions, the acoustic version and the electric version, are super good. And there's even a Led Zeppelin cover on here, Ramble On. Yeah, I really like this album. Beautiful Shade of Grey from James LaBrie. So yeah, there you go. And last but not least, we have the one, and I believe it's the only solo album from now ex-Dream Theater drummer Mike Mangini. This is his newest album, Invisible Signs. Yes, this is signed by him. That's not so invisible there, Mike. Pretty cool. Yeah, I'm happy to have this. He's one of my favorite drummers. I love Mike Mangini, love his work in Dream Theater. This is very different than his work in Dream Theater, though. This is more of a hard rock approach. This is kind of less proggy than you might expect it to be, given the fact that, he was in Dream Theater for 13 years, right? You'd probably expect when he made a solo album that it'd be a very progressive, very metal-y sort of thing. But this is metal in a more straight-ahead approach. But there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a huge metal and hard rock guy too. So yeah, this is also right up my alley. And of course, anything he does, he's going to do it great because he's a fantastic musician all the way around. Got the utmost respect and love and appreciation for Mike Mangini. So I'm happy to support whatever he does. And this is a very decent album. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. Mike Mangini, Invisible Signs. My favorite song on this is Freak of Nature. That is a definitely great hard rockin' tune. Love it. So here we are, folks. So many great albums, such little time. But we love talking about the great music here on Brockway's Vinyl Bites. Absolutely we do. And if you want to hear some of this amazing music that we're talking about here, I got not one, but 2 new online radio stations that you might want to check out. Every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, I do an hour show over on progradio.com. Then every Thursday night, it's still Thursday, right? At 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I have a 3-hour extravaganza over on Deep Nuggets Radio. That's right, it's www.deepnuggets.com. So, see you Thursday, and we'll see you right back here on Brockway's Vinyl Bites. Don't forget to rock on! Hi! Woo! Still one out to our middle sever than our fever. You can't bring new car, we don't have best help.